The Circulate project explores the certain tensions that arise when new technologies, and in this case distributed ledger technologies, are implemented in resource communities. Resource communities are groups of people who are sharing resources, and in some cases resources that they produce and also use communally. And these could be ranging from energy to mobility networks. The reason that we're looking at these communities now is that we see them emerging all over the Netherlands. So it's definitely a new phenomena that we think is not going to end anytime soon.
The people living in a resource community face the very concrete problem of managing and checking who uses which resources. And of course, considering that blockchain these days is very en vogue, so to say, we wanted to explore whether this kind of technology is a good fit for this problem space.
One of the aspects that we look into is the implementation of technology and whether technology can be considered a neutral medium. When we implement these kinds of technologies in communities, we seem to think that they won't have any effect besides the facilitation of managing systems. But actually they bring along with them a certain number of values that create tensions in these neighborhoods. And we don't really know what these tensions will lead to in terms of a possible deterioration of social relationships.
This is the reason why we developed a methodology and a series of design tools that can be used by resource communities to tease out the kind of values that they want to put in these technologies, and they will end up shaping the way in which they live in the future with this technology.
I'm a professor at the research group of Play and Civic Media, Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and I'm also the principal investigator of the Circulate project. The promise of the blockchain is that it's a database that is decentralized and that builds in a particular level of trust. Second, the blockchain is very much qualified because it can let you store all kinds of variables into a single database and making also their underlying relations visible, right? So you can store the amount of energy that people have consumed, but also the hours of voluntary work that they do. You can use it to store particular rights that people may have or may not have. You can use it to store their reputations. And on top of that, you can add smart contracts, which are sort of small automatic programs that start making linkages.
I am a designer. I work mostly embedded in communities and make installations in public space. The Circulate project was established to look more closely at how energy resource communities track, manage, and negotiate their resources. And in order to do this, it meant that we as researchers needed to zoom in on the technology that they were implementing to be able to do this. What we discovered along the way is that these same technologies bring with them maybe a shadow side, something that we were less prepared to look at, which is how they create specific tensions that could actually even tear at the fabric of communities that as we know them.
I am a senior researcher at the lectorate in Play and Civic Media here at the AUAS. I'm also head of program of the Master Digital Design. One thing that we see is that more and more different informal communities of people are gathering around specific issues and specific type of resources that they want to share. So it could be something as simple as sharing a solar panel and a smart grid or other type of hardware. The idea is that energy communities strive to be independent from the general electric grid, if that's the case of an energy community, and they try to imagine different ways of managing and self-govern their working.
I'm one of the 3 founders of Space and Matter. And Space and Matter is by origin a spatial design office. And we do architectural design and spatial planning. What we do is proactively develop concepts and visions and strategies which have turned out by now in built results with embedded close-knit communities. And that brings me to the two examples, which are also relatively well known at the general public. The Keuvel, and the Keuvel is a ecotech playground. It's actually the use of a polluted piece of soil in Amsterdam North. We said we'll just keep it this way, we can use it for 10 years. If we have second-hand houseboats, and actually redundant houseboats, also considered waste, on top of this wasteland, and make that into a creative incubator, a technology incubator, to show what the circular economy has to offer in a very practical implementation. A second project, also in Amsterdam North, is Schoon Schip. We call it the most sustainable floating self-sufficient neighborhood in Europe. And that's a community of 50 households that we also supported in unifying them as a group and building the sense of community, building the social network to be strong enough to take a professional position in taking charge of the development themselves.
The movement that we see happening now has a lot to do with also an ecological transition, both on the energy side and the production of goods and services. And by decentralizing this, it's more feasible to bring that to the forefront. Everything which is centralized takes away power from people, and by giving more power to people in a decentralized system, they are able to think of more fair systems. I've been working in sustainability related projects for over 7.5 years, mostly here at the Keuvel. Metabolic is a little bit more than just a company. We have a very ambitious mission, which is basically to transition the global economy to a fundamentally more sustainable state. I think the blockchain or distributed ledger technology has a very prominent role in these concepts of resource communities, primarily because we are decentralizing trust. And we live in a world of centralized trust with banks and governments who basically sort of create a blanket of trust around value, of money, of things. And by decentralizing, you need to have other ways of building trust within a system. And these distributed ledger technologies can help with that.
I'm an electronics developer at Spectral. I spend my days designing and building electronics and programming it for the energy sector. Spectral is a systems integrator specialized in the energy domain, while the smart community platform that we're developing is specifically aimed for small communities, or basically we're going to, of course, also create it for bigger communities on a later stage. But it helps them visualize all their energy assets. If they have a battery, we can read out the battery and check the status. We can give them an insight about their consumption and production patterns and see how they're doing as an individual, but also give them insight how they're doing as a community. Basically, if energy communities would start using blockchain, they can create a model of energy sharing or energy distribution amongst themselves while trusting each other. And through a shared ledger, they can look into the possibilities of disrupting and opening up other energy models.
A lot of private and public funding has gone into blockchain over the past 10 years. There was a huge hype of companies, startups using blockchain technology, but also there's a lot of research funding coming in for like what could blockchain do for society, and usually that's framed as blockchain for good, blockchain for social good, environmental good. Sustainable development goals are often also kind of attached to that. And I find this an interesting notion, like this using a technology for something for good. I'm a researcher at the Institute of Network Cultures, and that's a research group at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. So I'm involved in a project there that's been running for a few years already, Money Lab, and it kind of looks at what are the kind of social consequences of digital economic technologies. For me, the Circulate project has been really a great opportunity to spend dedicated time exploring what are the consequences of the blockchain technology. When the blockchain first was invented, there was a lot of talk about like, this is a trustless system. We can do it in a network, and we don't have to know each other. We don't have to trust each other. Actually, that's not the full story, because users are not always technically literate, and they don't always know exactly or understand exactly what a system does. And in that way, they kind of have to trust the designers of these systems to share their values and to have their best interest at heart. And so especially when you think of these kind of smart contracts that have automatic effects on someone's life, that really is a trust of a user in the system and in the design of the system. So those designers have a really big role to play in kind of listening to users and thinking about consequences.
The blockchain and this idea of such complex algorithmic data, it's so abstract. I mean, it's even abstract for us as researchers. And by looking for ways to make it tangible, I think that helps everyone. Like, it doesn't just help the community, it also helps us to talk about it with the community and to even understand it better as researchers ourselves.
If you look at the technologies that are used for resource communities, like the databases and the blockchain, at first sight they just look like administration tools, right? You just keep track of, okay, you have used so much of that resource, I have produced so much of that research. Yeah, that's it. But if you look closer at them, then you will see that in the matchmaking between the supply and demand, all kinds of rules are actually being encoded in the platform. At the moment that you start organizing those platforms and encoding those rules in the platform, they're not just an administrative tool anymore. They become a governance tool, right? They set the conditions under which people in a particular community work together, collaborate, produce, and consume their energy.
And the question becomes, who has the agency, right? Is it like the person that programmed your platform? Is it the community itself? Or is it the architect that's functioning as a kind of curator in the role of community builder?
If there's the necessity to have access to a specific resource, but there's a lack of availability, who's deciding? Is it the individual that's deciding, or is it the technology that's deciding? If we believe that the platform or potential algorithms can make these decisions, they cannot. It's the people that have to think through what we want the algorithm to do, and that's the difficult part. We haven't cracked that nut yet, but at least together with the HVA and in the Circulate research, we have come very close to specifically articulating this question and the notion that it is a dilemma, that it is a thin line between positive effect or dark side effects.
In the Circulate project, we've come up with 6 design dilemmas that designers will encounter when they start designing platforms for resource communities. And those dilemmas, it's not a matter of right or wrong. For instance, we have one dilemma which is transparency versus privacy. So the point we want to make is not that transparency is good and privacy is wrong, or the other way around. The point is that as a designer, you would need to understand the community that you design for and find a balance between those two. And more than even thinking of them in terms of black and white, so privacy, transparency, right? We like to think of it as a scale. Where in a full state of transparency, everything in the whole system is visible to everybody. So all the energy that is produced, all the energy that is consumed on a private and on an aggregate level is visible for everybody who is a member. That's complete transparency. Complete privacy is none of that is visible to anyone at any point except for me as the user, right? Now, there could be different scenarios in which you would, in some scenarios you would say the privacy of an individual person is the most important, so we want to safeguard that, and we were not going to make any data available to anyone else but the single user. However, if you do that, you lose out on some of the benefits of transparency, right? Because if, for instance, on the aggregate level, the system knows about all the users, you can better manage the system, right? Because you can use that data to optimize the system for a particular goal.
What I find it important in the work that we did with Circulate is that we explored the limits and the possibilities of what can be done with digital technology, and especially with digital ledgers and the blockchain. And we formulated some recommendations and some dilemmas that really poke at what should and maybe should not be done. So in a way, I really like that we are not solutionists. We do not say this is a problem and the digital is going to solve it. We say this is a problem. These are a few points for which a digital way of working might be helpful, and these are some other points in which the good old-fashioned face-to-face interaction and negotiation might actually be a better way to deal with.
People change, communities change, and by fixing rules within systems and using, for instance, blockchain technology for that, these systems run the risk of becoming less flexible, or not as flexible as the community where you are a part of. And this is a delicate process, and you need to be taking that into account when designing for your resource community.
One thing we discussed often throughout this project is like if we looked at Facebook, knowing what we know now at its inception, how would we have handled it differently? And I think with a lot of these emerging technologies, like distributed ledger technologies that are being quite quickly embraced by governments, but also on the community level, it's important to think about the implications of what we're actually dealing with before we get too far along with implementing them everywhere we think that they might be appropriate.
I think it's really important for designers, developers working with blockchain to act maybe a little slower, to really talk with a lot of people that might be involved in this system, and to think outside of their own, framework also. One thing they are right about is that it's going to have consequences, it's going to change things probably, but how and for who, that's a big question.
I think if you're a designer and you're going to enter this space of setting up platforms for resource communities, then I think it's very important to start with a value-sensitive approach, really figure out what are the values in those communities, but not only for the communities, also have a look at the indirect stakeholders, because something might be very beneficial for a small community, but may have detrimental effects for a larger community. And from that, work your way through the design. And I think, and I hope, that the 6 dilemmas that we have brought out in Circulate, that they can help as a guide or a checklist to have a look at value tensions, unforeseen consequences, implications of particular design decisions that you would make in setting up a system.